My name is Orlando Patterson. I'm Cowles Professor of Sociology at Harvard. And I work on various issues. I'm a historical and cultural sociologist who does comparative work. So I work on the historical development of freedom and slavery in the world. I work on development issues in the Caribbean, and I look at problems of race and inequality in America. So it's a wide range of interests. So the basic question the book asks, is what accounts for success and failure in development? And that's a big issue, of course, which economists and political scientists have been struggling with for a long time. And general feeling right now is that the economists did not get it right. Why do some countries succeed and others fail? The standard explanation, the so-called neoliberal explanations, the Washington consensus, it's sometimes called, free market, sort of find ways of incentivizing capital and so on, have been shown not to work. And so the emphasis, although some people still insist that that's what's critical, so there's been a shift towards recognizing that institutions and good politics are the critical factors. No one is saying that good policies aren't important. The question is which has priority. You have to get institutions right, or else the policies don't work, no matter how good the policies are, you see. And so this book can be seen in a way as a test of this, a sort of looking at what explains the failure and successes in the Caribbean, especially in Jamaica. And so it starts off by looking at a comparison of Jamaica and Barbados, which has become very important in the study of development, because it's what we call a natural experiment. You have in Jamaica and Barbados two countries which are similar in many respects. They're both island societies in the Caribbean. They both former British colonies, English-speaking, predominantly black societies, the same kind of history, slavery, emancipation, and so on, British colonialism. And there is an economist, Henry, who is, or was until recently, the dean of the business school at New York University. And he is very strongly for policies, the Washington consensus, the neoliberal policies. And he said, okay, I have a good way of testing whether institutions or policies are best. And he was the first person, and he deserves credit for this, who said, well, look, we have a nice natural experiment by looking at Jamaica and Barbados. They have similar institutions. They became independent about the same time. And fast forward 50 years, Barbados is doing quite well. It's going through a rough patch now, but that's because, like all small economies, it's exposed to the ups and downs of the world economy. Jamaica is not doing as well. I started talking about the democratic socialist regime, but since then, it's been stagnant growth except for a few periods. So what Henry said is, look, it couldn't be institutions because these two countries have the same institutions. So it must be good policies. This must be the Washington consensus. And a lot of people thought that was a very severe criticism of institutional approach. So I came in and said, wait a minute, not so fast. The first thing is that if you look more carefully, you'll see that Jamaica and Barbados didn't really start off equally. Barbados was already ahead. It was a highly educated population at the end of the colonial period, for example, whereas Jamaica was still way behind. Its GDP per capita was almost twice that of Jamaica. So that's the first thing to note before you start saying that you have two equal societies. The second thing is a point which is one of the major, I hope the main contribution of the book is to emphasize not just institution, but institutional competence, right? The core competences. I mean, you can have, you see, an institution is like a game, as the economist North said. It's the rules of the game. Whether it's the game of private property or contracts and so on. The rules of the game, but there's also how well you play the game, right? So I know all the rules of American baseball, but I can't play it. So institutional competence becomes an important thing. And one of the points the book emphasizes, especially in the long first chapter, is that you then have to go into the history to see what was going on in Barbados and what was going on in Jamaica. And you go into the history, you'll find a long pattern of institutional competence in Barbados, and the fact that Barbadians were exposed to the institutional processes and acquired this competence, especially in education, from much earlier than Jamaica. The book is called The Confounding Island because Jamaica, while it hasn't succeeded in gross macroeconomic terms, has been quite successful in other respects. And it presents a conundrum. It's, as is known, it's as the fastest men and women in the world. So it's been very successful in track, which is extraordinary. It's a little island of under 3 million people. Countries much larger, India, China, Japan, even the United States. So that's a major achievement. And it's not just a matter of talent, which a lot of people like to say, because, and it's not race, and it's not genetics. I discounted all of that. It has to do with building institutions. Building the institution, the best known of which, of course, is CHAMPS, the championship. But CHAMPS is part of a nexus, a wider network of a broad island-wide institutional structure which has been developed since the early part of the 20th century. So that's a very successful case of a country building a complex institutional structure leading to global dominance, And the same thing, again, is true of its music. This little island has created a music which is global in its significance and influence. Reggae is just phenomenal. And reggae, by the way, is partly involved, and although a lot of Black Americans tend to sort of look a little bit look at me a little bit suspiciously when I say this, but or disapprovingly, but it's now well known that hip-hop and rap emerged from the hybridization of reggae and Black American music in the Bronx, So we have a global music, which is just quite amazing, which again is not something that just emerged out of thin air. It involves really institutional building from the bottom up, and involving not just singers but a recording industry, which at one point was one of the most prolific in the world. Each of my chapters addresses both Jamaica, but also show how Jamaica illustrates broader global problems, right? So the first chapter, which I talked about earlier, looking at why is Jamaica trailing Barbados, is really addressing the broader issue of the significance of institutions and institutional competence. The second chapter on democracy and violence is explaining the specific problem of violence in Jamaica, but also addresses the broader issue of democracy and violence. And I do that with each of the chapters. So in a way, the chapter on reggae, on Jamaican music, explains, there's been a lot written on reggae, tons. I mean, like you see around there, there's a whole, several bookshelves of books on reggae. I took up and I drew heavily on that for the discussion, but mainly on secondary sources. Although I did bring in way back in the 60s, I did interviews with some singers which later became very well-known people. Like I had a long interview with Clancy Eccles, for example, and I mentioned some of that in the articles, but it draws mainly on the rich body of research on reggae. But the general point I wanted to make, in addition to the specific point at Jamaica, this is one of Jamaica's great achievements, has to do with globalization, the common view that globalization means westernization and especially Americanization. This is a common view. There's a counter view, which didn't originate with me, but which I strongly support and which I claim Jamaican music illustrates very well, which is the fact that no, it's not necessarily the case that when you have a strong influence of global culture, people simply succumb to it and become sort of completely under its influence. That what tends to happen is that people, the local response is one in which people take over the global influence and then transform it in light of their own local cultures. And that reggae illustrates the origins of reggae and its development illustrates that, because I showed how reggae was, the first, in the late 50s and early 60s, that's when I was a teenager growing up, you had a powerful influence of black American music, brought over by farm workers, brought over in various other ways, radio and so on. And it seems as if the global influence of American, especially black American music, is going to dominate Jamaica, as they seem to have ditched their mentor, which is the traditional music. But that didn't happen. What happened was that the Jamaicans sort of changed the music, used aspects of it to blend with, hybridize with mentor and other sources to generate ska and then reggae and later on dancehall. But the overall point of the book is to explain why Jamaica is so confounding, so has so many successes along with its failure. That what we have is a very dynamic society, a rich culture, and a lot of talented people. The problem is getting it together, and we've gotten it together at the micro and at the lower levels of the economy, but not in the broadest macroeconomic level. We're just beginning to do that now. So judging, evaluating a country requires more than just looking at GDP per capita. But behind it all is the role of institutions and mastering institutions, institutional competence. That's my single most important point. And how you do that, well, it depends on political will. Okay, and one central institution, which is important in itself, but important for all the others, and for institutional competence is education. The book is published by Harvard University Press, and it It's available at bookstores now already, at Harvard Bookstore, at the Coop, and elsewhere. The official date of publication is November 11th. But strictly speaking, they shouldn't be selling it before that, but you can get it at Harvard Bookstore and from Harvard University Press. I'm going to Jamaica next month, late next month, November, for a book launch there at the university. So I'm looking forward to that. The book is also being published as a subsidiary. Subsidiary rights have been sold to Jamaican publishing company, Ian Randall Publishers, who will be bringing out a paperback edition, which is more affordable in the Caribbean. I've also been in touch with lots of Jamaican organizations in America who've all expressed great interest in the work. So it's I'm very happy about doing this and reconnecting with Jamaica by going down there and talking about the book and talking to people and getting their responses.